Hey, it's time once again. DC Signal to Noise. See people popping in here, Jim, and ready to go on this Friday. Those that are popping in, you know the drill.
Yes.
Although I will warn you, this week we probably won't jump, especially we won't jump off topic as much to answer questions or comments because we've got just such a loaded list. So if you've got something that you want us to get to, in today's show, drop a comment or question right now in Facebook so we can get it set up in the queue. Because, Jim, it's been a long time since I've felt like I've been drinking from the fire hose like I have, particularly the last couple of days.
Yeah, this is back to my old wire service days. And I had to write so much this morning, I had to start last night. I knew there was a lot coming in, so it's going to be a long day.
It is going to be a long day. We'll try to get through as much of it as
Sure.
we can. Obviously, on just rolling through the list here real quick before we get started. In case there are questions you want answered on any of these specifically, we're obviously going to hit on the Cfap freeze, and there's more to the story than what's on the surface on this, Jim. We'll get into that. As a prelude, I'll say, and Jim, just on the technical side, we're getting a lot of breath noise on this. If you could adjust
Oh,
that mic a little bit, yeah, thanks.
all right.
I wasn't as concerned about this until I heard some comments. We were on a call with Senator Debbie Stabenow yesterday. I guess it was those weeks starting to run together. Some of her comments about CFAP gave me a little bit of pause that we may see some significant change to that. So we'll get into that.
Yes.
And the rest of the issues around CFAP, rounds 1, 2, and 3, and what may be playing out here. We'll get more into that call with Debbie Stabenow about her priorities for the Senate Ag Committee, which includes a lot on climate change and carbon capture and whether we could use CCC funding for that, all those issues. Obviously, we're going to talk about the huge China buys this week, record-setting buys from China, or at least announcement of sales that we hope to see follow through. Some more interesting back and forth between big oil and the biofuels industry. And we've hinted, and we talked about this issue in the past, Jim, about that those two industries need to come together to preserve a future for the internal combustion engine. But it's taken an interesting turn in the last couple of days.
Yes, it's like the Hatfields and McCoys.
It is, and so we'll see if the outcome is the same as the Hatfields and McCoys. Obviously, we'll touch on these South Africa, and I got to admit, I was quite frankly surprised at how much of an impact South African ag workers have
Yes.
on the U.S. market. We'll talk about that in the waiver that they got. Some things that you've been reporting on this week about possible changes coming to capital gains taxes and estate transfers that we'll get into. You say WOTUS is really rearing its ugly head again. We'll get into that. We'll get the latest on possibilities of the next COVID aid package. And if we've got time for it, some tidbits you've got on ARC PLC selection. And if we don't get it to it today, we'll get to it next week here. But so again, if you've got anything to add to that list or any questions specifically about any of those items, drop them in the comments and we will work them into the conversation. So with that, you ready, Jim?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get to recording in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Friday in DC Signal to Noise and Jim Wiesmeyer. I think this may be the most stacked topic-wise that we've ever been.
Yep, and we're going to get right to it.
Let's get right to it. Well, in fact, let's just start off with the issue that's probably, well, there's two issues that probably have generated the most buzz this week. One is the China sales. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But the other one has been the announcement by USDA that they are putting a freeze on CFAP. Specifically, right now, it's on CFAP 1 and 2, that $2.3 billion that was left over that was going to be targeted mostly for contract growers. Now they're saying they're still going to accept applications, but they aren't going to cut any checks until they review the program. before we get into some of the background on this we learned this week, what do you see on the surface of this announcement, Jim?
Well, I like to call it a pause rather than a freeze. Freeze might be too strong, but they're they both mean the checks aren't going out.
Right.
This is typically, John, as you well know, what an incoming new administration does on a prior administration for an undesignated number of days or weeks that they review any of the last month or so rules and proposals from the prior administration. Now, this fits into that overall category, but as you kind of hinted, incoming Senate Ag Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow on a briefer earlier this week applauded the pausing of those supplemental payouts, which I like to call them. But she then went into a litany of that it didn't address provisions in the final legislation calling for aid for farm workers, smaller food processors, smaller
Bulk shippers, yeah.
workers, workers and others involved in the supply chain. That tells me that we could well see some changes. Now, the other thing I would watch out for, I'm trying to find out. Remember, the outgoing USDA announced that up to $2.3 billion would be made available, and around 90% of that was for contract poultry and hogs. I've been told that there could be additional funding yet to be announced above that up to $2.3 billion level.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah, and as you point out, that rule setting forth how that 2.3 billion was going to be spent was promulgated on January 15th, obviously 5 days before the new administration came in. And again, this is part of a broader executive order ordering a pause on any executive or any rules that were promulgated just before the inauguration. Again, initially my thought is, okay, it's, they're looking at everything. They're going to look at it, then move on. But as you noted, Debbie Stabenow in that press call yesterday, she became very animated when asked about this and was very, very stern that there were issues that she put in the CARES Act and the subsequent December coronavirus aid package that to this point have not been addressed, and she was pretty forthright that she wanted to see those addressed. And it's not clear if that comes out of Cfap 1 and 2 or Cfap 3.
Or a combination, because
Right.
recall, John, that Stabenow and her staff issued a number of reports on the regional distribution of prior CFAP payments that they thought overdid it on for the southern states and not enough for the mid-tier states. I mean, that's a summary, and then there was also a General Accountability Office report that she and others made sure got out. So she has a really good history of following through. And now she has a key former staff member at USDA.
Right.
So I would watch for that. I think she's going to get some changes, John.
So does you're reading the tea leaves? Do we see that allocation for CFAP 1 and 2, that 2.3 billion? Does that allocation get shifted at this point?
Well, remember, I have to know what the total funding is. If it goes above 2.3 billion, which I think it could be, then they can do some other changes. But it could notwithstanding, it could be shifted somewhat, because if you recall, the vast majority of that 2.3 billion dollars was for poultry contract producers.
Right. And then what does this tell us for CFAP 3? I mean, obviously some of it is, some of the rules for how it is spent are spelled out in the legislation, including, I believe, the per acre payments. But does this mean that we're going to see maybe a shifting of the formula for how those per acre payments are made?
Well, somewhat. I know the $20 per acre for the trigger crops will probably stay because, as you said, that's written in the legislation, and it's been fairly well received by both Republicans and Democrats and farm groups, by the way. There could be some nuance changes in payment rates and other aspects that Stabenow signaled in her presser.
Interesting. All right, so we'll keep
Yes.
a watch on that. Again, though, if you do qualify for that CFAP 1 and 2 supplemental, go ahead with the application. They are still taking
Yes.
applications, so please move forward with that. We'll revisit this, I'm sure, next week. You and I both asked USDA for some clarity on how long they expect this review to take and if they anticipate any changes. Well, they completely ignored the question about if they anticipate any changes, but said that just that they are going to move as quickly as possible, and they see this as an important program to get moving. So
Yeah, they do. And recall that on the CFAP 3, that's the $20 per acre, they had indicated that it probably wouldn't be paid out until the late March or even
right.
as late as early April. So they've got some time here, John, because they had to write a new software package and a rule for this one. So I don't think they're going to be impacted from a timeline, perspective from what we knew before. Maybe the specifics in it will change.
Yeah, but obviously, just the notion that they're reevaluating CFAP certainly gets people's attention, and that's what's generated a lot of the concern this week.
Yes, because we're going to learn again. It's just not legislation; it who implements that legislation. And
Yes.
we've had a changing of the guard, so I fully expect some changes. Whether or not they'll be very important remains to be seen.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we mentioned that press conference call by Senator Debbie Stabenow, who is returning to the chairmanship of the Senate Ag Committee. And she laid out her priorities. And of course, priority number one is confirmation of Tom Vilsack as USDA Secretary, as well as confirmation of his deputy. Vilsack's hearing is Tuesday.
Tuesday.
We think that is if the Senate leadership can get their organizing resolution ironed out today.
And
That's
we
making a
don't
good
get
assumption.
bombarded with snow. We're supposed to get snow here Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, and this town falls apart with a half an inch of snow.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, they can now get some of this done
Virtual.
via teleconference, as we've
Yeah.
seen. So,
Yes.
still a possibility. But it is a good sign, though, that Debbie Stabenow and John Bozeman, the ranking member, were able to work together to get the pieces in place for this confirmation hearing, even without that organizational resolution in place. So that is a good sign that we are going to see a continuation of bipartisanship in that committee.
Absolutely. And she worked quite well with the former Senate Ag Committee Chairman, now retired, Pat Roberts. So I think her history shows that at least at a leadership level, she's a good partner.
All right, what do you expect from this confirmation hearing Tuesday for Tom Vilsack, Jim? I mean, obviously we're going to have hours of speechifying, but after that's done, it's pretty much drink the coffee, eat the donuts, and take a vote and head home, isn't it?
Well, yes, the sensitive issues will go on his prior experience in dealing with some, Black American issues.
Right.
If you're against him, you usually bring that up. I think that he'll have adequate responses, but that's one area. Two is, yeah, he will be asked to sound out on climate change and what his role will be that, will be in that, relative to his, farmer position.
Yeah, and that is going to be the key thing to watch, I think, in this confirmation hearing, is it's going to be our first chance to hear directly from Tom Vilsack how he sees his role in this administration that is so focused on climate change.
Yes, and I doubt, but I hope a lawmaker asks him relative to the significant need in rural America for broadband, fast broadband, internet band. Not just the funding, but I hope states track all those billions of dollars that are going to states to see if they're actually being spent for rural broadband. In fact, I've queried a number of lawmakers about this topic, so that may come up next Tuesday.
Yeah, and that just as an aside, I mean that's an issue we're seeing firsthand as I deal with some colleagues as we've over this last year gone virtual, and we have colleagues who are in very rural areas because we are several of us, not me, but several of the people on the Farm Journal staff are farmers in addition to being writers or whatever for Farm Journal. And they either can't get internet at all, or if they can get it, it's like $250 a month, which is just outrageous. So
Yes.
it is remarkable with the millions and billions that have been spent on rural broadband that we're still in this situation.
Yes, and that's why I say track the money. I want to see how those states, I know it went awry under both the Obama and to a degree the Trump administration. I would want to see where every dollar went in the states for all that money, John.
Indeed, indeed. Let's go through some of the other priorities for W. Stabenow, the chair of the Senate Ag Committee. After the confirmation of Tom Vilsack, she said next up for her is addressing the COVID crisis, and in particular, the hunger problems that have been brought out and made worse because of the COVID situation. She wants to see expansion of SNAP eligibility and expansion of other programs that provide hunger relief across America.
Yeah, and she usually goes on the timing, like that, food box program. She wants to look at the timing of when those boxes go out. Bottom line on not just Stabenow, but any Democrat, is they're going to have a significant increase in funding for food and nutrition programs, SNAP or food stamps for sure. There's not a dollar they don't want to spend on that.
Yeah, and that's I know there's often seen as kind of a pull back and forth between SNAP and the farm portion of the farm bill, but as we've seen in particular with this food box program, there can be a strong benefit to production agriculture in some of these nutrition programs if they are buying commodities to provide food assistance for others, while at the same time providing financial assistance to our farmers.
Absolutely. Just ask the dairy industry how
Yeah.
significant that food box program. And now that we have one of his 26, I think, executive orders, this week,
I believe we're up
meaning
to
President
27 now. Yeah.
27, meaning President Biden. One of those is Buy American, and that gets into the food, purchases by the American government. And I was surprised how much non-U.S. food is actually bought, John.
Yeah, I was too, especially in the school lunch program.
Yes,
That is pretty
absolutely.
remarkable.
Yes.
Um, After the hunger priorities and COVID priorities, obviously priority across government and a priority expressed by Senator Stabenow is addressing climate and carbon capture. And I'm going to let you expand on this because you've got some definite thoughts on this. She talked a lot about making it work for farmers, making it providing financial incentives for farmers. But you're also concerned about where she's headed with possible regulation and requirements on this.
Well, she said that I thought the most significant thing in her press conference was using climate change funding and USDA CCC Charter Act. She thought that it would be eligible. But then the key was that's a process to get a better, bigger budget baseline for the next farm bill. And that's when bells went off for me. That's going to be a way that Stabenow and other farm state lawmakers will attempt to get a bigger farm bill budget baseline whenever it is written, John, because the around $50 billion that has been paid out relative to trade mitigation and Cfaps are not in the budget baseline.
Right.
So that's a big opening. So I think that was key number one. And also she has a bill with Republican Braun from Indiana that will probably be the beginning point for at least her push for climate change, and she'll emphasize the conservation stewardship program. So yeah, she made clear, other than COVID and food and nutrition, as you said, climate change is going to be a very important part of her agenda.
Yeah, and I asked her specifically about whether she thought USDA already had authority to use CCC money to accomplish the goals that she has, and she said yes, she thinks they do. They are reviewing it further, but she thinks that authorization is there, and that could mean a couple of things. One, they've got plans to do things in a way that falls under existing programs that would already fall under CCC, or they think that CCC is wide open to use for climate issues.
Also, yeah, that is one avenue. The other one would be in coming legislation, perhaps in budget reconciliation where it only needs a majority vote, you can put specific language in there authorizing such funding out of
Right.
USDA CCC Charter Act. So I would look, to that.
But
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 here,
she indicated she didn't need that to get
but
done what she wants to get done. Yeah.
it's always, and I would agree that they'll just tell the lawyers. I've said this before. I learned a long time ago at USDA where the secretary says this is the way we want the law to go, and the lawyers, pour forth, and that's more fact than fiction. But still, I think to codify it is still always the better approach, John, because then you don't
You're
have to
right.
get a challenge on that. The second one, if that were to occur, I can just hear, they won't say publicly, but the commodity groups and the farm groups are going to say, "Ooh, we don't want that CCC Charter Act to go away from what it's really doing now with more farm program payments, CSP, a conservation reserve program, etc." So that may give some impetus, John, to increasing the current $30 billion maximum for CCC borrowing authority. So this is tying into a number of related issues.
Well, and we're going to get into this more the next because her last item. Well, she had a couple of the smaller things, but the other main item was getting ready for the 2023 Farm Bill or whatever year it ends up being,
Yes,
and talking about getting away from these ad hoc payments. But I think this is an illustration that the Democrats have seen what the Trump administration did with CCC and use it as kind of that open piggy bank, and they see an opportunity here with climate to do kind of the same thing.
absolutely. And remember, her bill is called the Growing Climate Solutions Act. So I would Google that to see some of the specifics. And the companion bill in the House was introduced by Spanberger from Virginia and Don Bacon from Nebraska. Uh, but this is going to be the avenue at which they get that additional, funding, and it's needed in the next farm bill. Also recall that Farmer House Ag Committee Chairman Colin Peterson, who lost his race, said that in the next go around he wanted to look into the CCC Charter Act and also find a way that they could handle some disasters in agriculture without going back to ad hoc programs all the time. I think this follows up on that, John.
Yeah, indeed. Well, and that leads into what Debbie Stepanow said about the 2023 Farm Bill. They're going to start, as I always do, listening sessions and start some of the background work getting ready for that Farm Bill. But again, she was very animated when she talked about her priorities for the Farm Bill, and priority number one was to get away from the ad hoc payments and get this farmer safety net and risk management in place so that ad hoc payments weren't needed. Well, isn't that where we were supposed to be with the current Farm Bill?
Yes, but I said at the time it would not be successful relative to
Right.
that, and it wasn't, John. So I think she's right, and I think Colin was right. It's about time to really look into that safety net. There's just too many holes in it. Now, you can't forecast the black swan of COVID-19. I understand that, but it does need to be improved. But you typically, usually, I'm not saying just money solves everything. In fact, a lot of times it hurts, but they do need additional funding. So that's why all these things tie together. But I think she's right to open up the discussion. I don't see much activity for the new farm bill this year. They'll have regional or state hearings and things like that. Also, there should be some oversight hearings. We didn't have many oversight hearings
Yeah.
relative to the 2018 Farm Bill, and that's where some of the negatives or exposures to a lack of an effective safety net could come out if we really truly have oversight hearings.
Well, and let's face it, with the Farm Bill in 2023, we aren't going to have really serious discussions about it until we clear the 2022 election and we know where the power structure in Congress lays after that 2022 election.
Absolutely, because we could have a flip in the House from Democrats to Republicans, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. But you're spot on. Don't get too serious this early.
All right, well, let's move on to these big China buys this week. And Joe checking in asking, do we have enough grain supply to supply these big sales? At what point are we oversold? Well, we're not oversold yet. China keeps buying, and of course that means that beans in particular are bidding for acres in 2021, and we have the X factor of what South America does in the off season. But in the meantime, China is big in the market, and that's been providing a nice boost to the market.
Oh, absolutely. Here's my perspective on that question. U.S. exporters, I've been told, are not offering old crop soybeans for exports. And you notice that the daily sale for soybeans today was for new crop. So we're down to that rust level relative to carryover for soybeans. As for corn, the announcement that we had today was the largest daily U.S. corn sale to China and the second largest daily corn sale ever. The biggest one being the former USSR at a little over 3.7 million tons, January the 9th, 1991, John. So these are effective sales now that are adding up. And the pickle here is that we're almost at the level just on corn sales this week to China that USDA's World Board initially had that China was going to import from all origins in 2020-21 to show you
Wow.
how far they missed that months ago. And
Wow.
it sets up in the next WASD report, the S&D report from USDA. Last month they cut U.S. corn exports. Now are they going to have to increase corn exports? Another potentially embarrassing move on the part of USDA. So let's hope as a nation we never have to throttle back exports like Ukraine and Russia and things like that because we have been a reliable supplier. So let the debate on price rises begin.
Indeed, and on that supply side, we have seen crushers trying to buy up as much as they can because they're not sure, and as far out in the future as they can because they're not sure what that availability is going to be. So there is
Absolutely.
real concern out there in the marketplace. But Jim, what obviously there is a political angle to this. China announcing very big purchases and a lot of them in the initial days of a new presidential administration. What signal are they trying to send?
Well, based on my emails, of which it was some very interesting emails of veteran contacts. Some of them told me that these sales were made quite some time ago and just were not announced. I don't know the
Really?
truth. Yes, I mean, I got some of that from sources. Other traders said, you look at the action last Friday, and that's when you saw that dramatic run up in corn prices and you saw basis tightening, etc. So I had a disagreement on that in the trade, but it's interesting nonetheless. Before I forget, I wanted to also bring in Bloomberg reported that the Biden administration is going to put phase one under review as well relative to the U.S. China trade agreement. But I didn't think that was blockbuster news because really Biden has indicated from day one that he wants a multi-month review of Trump's trade policy. So, but they did
Yeah.
announce that at the White House press conference today.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's surprised by that. I mean, they've been
No.
telegraphing that they want to do that
Yes.
even, the right after the election.
And before we forget, China bought roughly 200 million gallons of US ethanol for delivery the first half of this year, ADM announced, and that eclipsed the prior record of just a little over 198 million gallons in 2016. So we've got some momentum in this corn and ethanol industry, and you saw that ethanol prices have now rebounded, John, past the pre-COVID levels. So does the ethanol industry need aid right now? That's a question to be asked.
Well, it depends
RIN,
on how high corn goes.
yes, and RIN prices are going higher because the RIN
Yeah.
bank surplus, I've been told, has narrowed, and because of those favorable court rulings, along with the realization by refiners that they're not likely to see those SRE waivers anytime soon.
And that announcement by ADM in their earnings call was important because those ethanol sales can go under the radar because they aren't reported by USDA like the corn and soybean sales are. So it's easy for them to be lost in this. But that
Yes.
that is a very significant impact on the corn market with that big sale of ethanol to China.
There's your signal that China needs the corn. There's been scattered shot reports from usually pretty reliable sources, John, not just in this country, that China is experiencing some food scarcities. And
Hmm.
that's something to at least monitor. And are they building up their stocks from probably from a geopolitical perspective? And as I raised on AgriTalk this morning, I don't call it negative news at all, but look at the significance of China's purchases of U.S. farm products. We're putting a lot of eggs in one basket, and relative to the future U.S. China relations, that's a potential wild card. And the biggest reason I know why we have to have new and growing market access and new trade agreements, John. We're getting top heavy on China.
Yeah, like TPP in
Yes,
particular.
yes.
Um, but it isn't the big signal here that China's trying to say to the new administration, "Hey, we want to get back to the negotiating table."
Oh, there's no doubt. Yes. And when you heard their President Xi Jinping earlier this week, he did the carrot and the stick. You know, that the carrot was let's talk. We can help each other on climate change and food areas. And COVID vaccines, etc. But they were more than concerned of the U.S. overtures toward Taiwan. So there's your carrot and stick, and it could go either way. Xi and China are flexing their muscles, and so
Yeah.
that's always has to be on the front burner that this relationship could really be topsy-turvy in the months ahead.
All right, let's shift gears again and talk biofuels because there's a lot to talk about here. We got this a question from Kirby. How big a role will biofuels play into the climate change policy goals for Senate and House Ag Committee leadership? I think the bigger question is how do they play into the policy roles being lined out by the Biden administration this week? And that is a point of contention at the moment between the biofuel industry and the big oil industry. We have talked for some time here, Jim, about the need for biofuels and oil to come together and make a case that, again, I think you and I agree that a switch to electric vehicles is somewhat inevitable at this point, but it is going to take some time, and that there is a significant role to be played by the internal combustion engine, and in particular biofuels, to bridge that gap and reduce carbon emissions by using, in particular, ethanol. But that's going to require the oil industry and the ethanol industry to work together, which is something they have not been able to do up to this point. So, well, draw the picture for us of what's happening this week in this call from the biofuels industry and the story from Reuters. It's really kind of strange what's
Yes.
been going on.
Well, Reuters initially reported that the oil industry has made overtures, they said, to the corn and biofuel industry to enlist their help in helping to fight the push for electric vehicles. That's interesting. Now, the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association did confirm that they've been reaching out to state and national reps in the corn and biofuel industry, and there's apparently a requested meeting sometime in February, according to Reuters. Now, the Renewable Fuels Association president, Jeff Cooper, said the group had been invited to the February meeting, but had not yet decided on their participation. And I think his quote is key. He said, "We weren't born yesterday, and we're not going to let the oil industry play us like a fiddle. They've a long history of pushing surrogates and proxies to the microphone to do their dirty work, and we're not interested in that." Isn't that
I
interesting?
think that last part is the key in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the end goal of the two industries is the same, but the approach is vastly different. I mean, you've heard the biofuels industry talk, and Jeff Cooper in particular, and Emily Score at Growth Energy saying, offering up solutions here and saying, hey, we've got a way to instantly lower carbon emissions if we would embrace corn-based ethanol immediately, go to an E15 blend. You're going to immediately see a significant drop in carbon emissions from that. Whereas the oil industry's take is we need the biofuels industry to tell the Biden administration to back off this EV mandate, and back off the ban on drilling in federal lands. And I don't think that's a position that the biofuel industry wants to be in.
Yeah, well, I don't see Biden or the Democrats backing off that. And of course,
No.
now Biden also wants to go, needs congressional support on this one, which will be hard to eliminate the subsidies to the oil industry. If that's not a wild card issue, I don't see it happening. But just
Well,
the
it's something
thrust.
that the biofuel industry has pushed for.
Absolutely. But then, once they do that, then you look at other subsidies, and they have big
Mm-hmm.
subsidies as well. What the ethanol and biofuels industry has going for them at the perfect time now, you had a report come out from Harvard, or an affiliated group with Harvard, the Environmental Health and Engineering Incorporated group, that shows ethanol greenhouse gas emissions, John, are 46% lower than gasoline. EPA is currently using the assumption that that's just 20%. So this updated study, I think, is going to be a key tool that the biofuel industry can use as they seek to expand the use of the fuel, especially linked into the climate change debate, and reduced miles driven by consumers. So there's your link right there that the biofuels industry can go with, and why the oil industry better lock onto this, because they're going to need the biofuel industry.
Yeah, yeah. For either of them to survive, they're going to need each other to do this.
Yes.
And as an illustration of that, we saw General Motors this week announce that they plan to go to all electric vehicle production by what, 2035?
Yes, and they're putting $27 billion to that goal. Now, I know a number of people have said, oh, they've said that before, things like that, but they're putting a lot of money involved here. And then you had Biden come out this week and say he wants to move all electric federal fleets into the EV area, and that's that's significant because there's around 645,000 vehicles, John, in the federal fleet,
Wow.
and just shy of 4,800 are now electric. So all this is adding up, John. It's just and the investment community's looking at this, and they're going to add more investment money to the continued growth in the electric vehicles, battery research and technology, etc. Again, it's not a question of if EVs are going to take over; it's when and to what degree.
Yeah, and what I think is different about this announcement by General Motors is they've already been making structural changes within the company to push in that direction. It's not just that they're announcing this, but they're actually changing the structure of the company in an effort to accomplish that goal of all EVs by
Agree.
2035.
Agree.
All right, let's move on to the next issue, and that is South Africa. I've got to admit, Jim, when I heard that the U.S. was going to put a travel ban on travelers from South Africa coming into the United States, I did not immediately think of any impact on agriculture. I quickly learned otherwise.
Yeah.
There are some 5,000 H2A workers in agriculture from South Africa, and including a number here in the state of Indiana. I wasn't aware it was that much of an influence, and it very quickly was addressed by the State Department. Today, they issued an exemption for those H2A workers from South Africa.
Yeah, and who says government can't act fast? I mean, they needed that because of the coming ban.
Yeah.
So, and the exemption, John, also applies to H-2B visa holders who work in the food supply chain. And I'm trying to get a handle on that one as well. I think, as you said, on H-2A, it's at least 5,000, if not larger. And I'm trying to get a handle on those H-2B visa holders. But it was a good, fast action because of the importance of the South African workers in the ag sector.
Now, obviously, that needs to be followed up with some pretty serious screening of those workers coming in
Yes.
because of that variant strain in South Africa. But
Yes.
hats off to the State Department for acting quickly on that and getting that through. Because I know there were growers that were very concerned about getting a 2021 crop in without those workers that they had set up to come and assist. So good news there. Now, some not so good news, possibly. You reported in your newsletter this morning, and again, I would encourage people to sign up for that newsletter because you're going to get a leg up every morning, and go to profarmer.com to get the details on that. But, Jim, there may be some significant tax changes coming, particularly in relationship to capital gains, and specifically capital gains when assets roll over because of the death of a member of the family.
Yes, we hit that hard in my copy, policy updates on profarmer.com, and in the newsletter, we did put out the facts that Biden has consistently said that he wants to increase some individual income taxes, but raise the estate taxes really exponentially by cutting the federal exemption in half, eliminating the step up in basis rules, and increase the taxation rate of capital gains. Now, his plan would raise the long term cap gains tax, John, to 39.6% for some. And that would make selling property much more expensive for many landholders. And now, bottom line on this, is it going to go? Some of it will. Corporate taxes are going to be increased. I don't think as much as Biden and some Democrats want, but I think they're going to be increased. Capital gains taxes are going to be increased, I think, but not nearly as much. This estate tax thing, I don't think they're going to drop them by half, but it's going to be looked at. And there's going to be pushback, not just from Republicans, but a number of some key Democrats. And this is not going to show up in a proposal yet relative to the budget reconciliation that only takes a majority vote rather than the 60 needed. But it's going to come up later this year and with the second budget reconciliation. So we have time to research this, John, and different groups have time to lobby their individual sectors, agriculture, the other business community, etc. But the die is cast here. The Democrats are going to need more funding in order to offset some, clearly not all, of their huge increase in spending in the years ahead.
Yeah, and in years past, there's been all kinds of attention on the estate tax, or as farm groups like to call it, the death tax. But really, in this round that you're talking about, the most dangerous would be the loss of stepped up basis, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the one where now that we have time to educate, I think that they'll show that that thing better be treated very gingerly, because not just for agriculture, but the in total investment and financial community. If you want to tip yourself into a recession, this is the way to do it, John.
Well, and yeah, there's all kinds of implications for stocks and other items, but in our area, in our area of expertise, it really makes it difficult, or would make it very difficult, to pass on a family operation, a family business, whether it's a family farm or a small business or whatever it is. If you lose that step up in basis and have those other tax provisions go into place, it would make it very, very difficult to pass on a small business.
Absolutely. Regretfully, in the months ahead, I got to write a lot about tax policy. So it always gives me headaches, but I've ordered a couple new bottles of wine, so get
Oh, there
ready.
you go. Well, maybe as this develops, we'll invite Paul Neiffer to join us on one of
Oh,
these
we
sessions
should.
to walk
Yes,
through it. Yeah,
we will have him on. We only might, we will.
we will. That's Paul Neiffer from
Yes.
Clifton Larson Allen, who is our tax expert for AgWeb. We'll definitely have him on as we get more details on this. He can provide a lot more clarity for us. I don't even want to say this word, but Jim, WOTUS is coming back. Really?
Well, they're going to try. Biden said he wants to return to the WOTUS rule. Now, it's an issue that just doesn't go away. And this is why, John, you go with codifying a rule
Yeah.
rather than announcing it administratively.
Well, I mean, but to be honest, don't we have to? Doesn't this administration have to deal with the WOTUS rule because of that court case from the Obama era that's still hanging out there? I mean, there needs to be a a final rule put in place that that addresses that definition of waters of the U.S.
Yes, and it's really going to take that. It's really going to take the Supreme Court to clarify, you know, that. And others tell me it may take an act of Congress to resolve the issue. You're not going to get anything from Congress on this issue. It's just too controversial, you know. So I think the Supreme Court's going to have to act again on this one, clarify it.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and clarify is the word because that was the biggest issue in agriculture with the Obama era WOTUS rule is that there was no clarity in it. A landowner could not go out, look at the rule, look at his land, and know whether or not he was under the regulation of the Clean Water Act because WOTUS was so vague. So do you think the Biden administration has learned the lesson from where the Obama administration was, or are we going to see that level of confusion again for agriculture?
Well, I hope once they have time, because they're at a pell-mell pace on these executive orders. I think as the weeks go on here, John, that they'll have meetings on this and they'll see the errors of the past. I think the Biden team will ask the courts to put WOTUS litigation on hold to give EPA and the Army Corps time to decide if and how to rewrite that Trump administration 2020 rule, lifting those federal protections for many small waterways nationwide. So we need to see their next step of really what they want to do. Is it the total return to WOTUS? I certainly hope not. Because that would mean that they didn't learn the lessons of the past. And so we'll see.
Well, let's hope that John Doggett and Ray Starling and the rest of them are right about the relationship agriculture has had with Michael Regan, the incoming EPA administrator, and hopefully his ears are still open to those concerns of agriculture and those get addressed as WOTUS gets revisited.
Absolutely.
All right, the time we've got left, let's hit on COVID aid. The Democrats are still pushing for that package that includes an additional the $1,400 payments, additional money for states and municipalities. Where do we stand with this? I know they've talked about maybe stripping some things from it to try to get it passed. They're also talking about just shoving it through on budget reconciliation. Where do we end up?
Now, this is another interesting one with all sorts of angles. One is that the White House indicated this week it doesn't want to strip anything from the proposed $1.9 trillion package. The Democrats on the Hill certainly don't want that, although Republicans are saying, look, if this is really needed, let's just pull out the COVID aid related features, including the cash payments. I mean, we may want to target them better, and let's come at it. That they're not getting a consensus on that. You also have what appears to me a big difference between congressional Democrats and President Biden on this one. Biden keeps saying that he wants a bipartisan approach to this issue. He and his staff have talked to a number of moderate Republicans, but I don't think they've gone very far because they're hearing the same thing I just told you, that the Republicans want a target approach, and they don't think a $15 minimum wage is even should be part of any budget
Right.
reconciliation process. They think that there are some problems there. And of course, the $350 billion that Biden and the Democrats want for aid to state and local governments. So we're going to see next week is when they're, I think, going to unveil the budget resolution, which is step one. Watch that in the House and Senate. That's step one toward the process of getting the first of several budget reconciliations that they may eventually tie this COVID aid package to. And if it goes through budget reconciliation, John, we're really talking March as far as the end zone on this one.
That's interesting. It'd be interesting to track it and see what it does. And again, a reminder that if they do go the budget reconciliation route, the reason they do that is they just need a simple majority in the Senate, not the 60 votes to get cloture to get it
Yes.
to the floor. So
Yes.
it'll be interesting to see if they are able to find those additional 10 votes in the Senate to have a bipartisan bill. But as it looks right now, with the structure of the bill, as you said, it doesn't look likely that they will find those 10 votes in the Senate to get that done.
And see, and this is giving fodder to some of the Democrats who say, see there, that the Republicans are going to be obstructionists. We need to get away. We need to get rid of the filibuster. So that's another angle in this.
Yeah, does that happen though? I mean, really, you've seen Senator Manchin already say he is absolutely dead set against getting rid of the filibuster. So that would likely doom any effort to do that. So is there any real likelihood that the Democrats could get rid of the filibuster in the
Well,
Senate?
you can always change, but Manchin is just not the only Democrat saying that he
Yeah.
doesn't want to end the filibuster. Siemens, or the senator from Arizona, has indicated, and I think a number of others. So I don't think they have the votes to do away with the filibuster.
All right. And again, I know a lot of folks see the filibuster as obstructionist, but I think you and I know I would argue, and I think you would agree, it is a moderating factor in Congress that can slow things down and force compromise, which you and I often see as a good thing, right?
Yes.
I'm not sure what you're throwing at me there.
My
But...
cat has joined us, so.
Oh, okay. You're throwing cats at me. I see.
So yeah, but this is what to watch out. I do not see the filibuster ending because the seasoned Democrats know that the control will eventually pass again to the Republicans, and they don't know what they're going to get relative to legislation from the on the Republican side and a Republican White House.
All right, and the cat's presence reminds me, I haven't mentioned yet, the reminder for folks who are listening to this podcast and not watching, you can watch and see Jim's cat if you join us at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Fridays. We stream this live as we record it on the AgriTalk Facebook page, and give you a chance to make comments and ask questions as we do so. So if you are listening to the podcast, join us for the live broadcast next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the AgriTalk Facebook page. All right, Jim, let's wrap up with some news you have on making ARC and PLC selections for the 2021 crop year.
Yeah, the safety net options for 2021 crops. I had a number of emails from farmers and other analysts that said, boy, you ought to caution farmers that to make sure they know they have options because apparently some county offices have automatically put ARC in for a farmer's choice. I'm not quite sure that's accurate, but that's what I've been told. Now, farmers have until March 15th to finalize their decision between ag-risk coverage, ARC, and price loss coverage, PLC for 2021 crops. But that's not the only thing that a farmer should option out. I've been told they should also consider what's called the supplemental coverage option, or SCO, and the new enhanced coverage option, ECO, via the crop insurance when making their safety net decisions. And I think that's very solid advice. Now, SCO may not work in the main Corn Belt states, but in areas like Dakota, I've been told it'll pencil out in some cases. And so look at these programs and go to either Texas A&M or the University of Illinois decision tables and plug your data in, because that'll help you decide which program option that you should choose.
All right. So go check those out. All right, Jim,
Yes.
Let's talk about what we're watching for Signal next week. I know for me, the number one thing is watching that Tom Vilsack confirmation hearing to see what he has to say about climate change. Where are you watching for Signal next week?
Well, initially I'm watching the weather because I'm taking my first flight, a little nervous, from here to St. Louis, and then I've got to get in a car and go to the Ozarks for a pork industry meeting. I really can't wait to be live in a meeting, but I'm going to have to be very careful. But other than that, yes, I will watch the Vilsack hearing, watching his tone, and on the key subjects on race relations, the farmer safety net, COVID aid, maybe trade policy, and above all, his role in the coming climate change debate, John.
All right, great. Well, I'm John Harris. That's Jim Wiesmeyer. What's the cat's name?
Muffin. She's a ragamuffin, a cross between a Persian cat and a ragdoll. And she's alpha personified. She's my first female cat, and I shouldn't say this too loud, but I think females are smarter.
I've got a wife who wouldn't disagree with you. All right. So join me, John Harris, Jim Wiesmeyer, and Muffin next Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern on the AgriTalk Facebook page. That's a wrap for this week's edition of DC Signal to Noise.